24 containers of and it's not actually an explosive, it's an oxidizer called sodium perchlorate. Sodium perchlorate is not explosives, but it is used in explosives. It's used specifically in the solid rocket fuel that's put into missiles by Iran that then get fired at Israel, like they did in April and in October of last year. And as you know, Israel's response in October, on October 26th or whatever it was last year, was to take out not only all of Iran's air defense capability, but to also take out their ability to make this solid rocket fuel. They had a couple of plants available where they could make this stuff into rocket fuel, and those were all destroyed in that attack by Israel. So Iran doesn't have the ability to replace the missiles, the fuel for the missiles that it fired at Israel at this point. And obviously they're looking for a way to do that so that they can replenish their stockpiles and live to fight another day. However, so they're going to have to get it from outside of Iran, but these 24 containers of sodium perchlorate was perchlorate was sent to them from China. Now, I didn't get a chance to talk about this very much on the last live, but look, that's a big deal, folks, because there is a very small use, non-military use for sodium perchlorate. Very small. So like enough that you could put in a carry-on bag, which you wouldn't, of course, but you know, that amount of sodium perchlorate could handle all of the industrial use of that chemical for a long time, years, in Iran. So the only reason they're bringing it in is obviously to make solid rocket fuel for their missiles. And China knows that. And China is party to a UN treaty that's a weapons non-proliferation treaty that says if there's a chemical that is a dual-use chemical that could be used for military purposes, and then you can't send it to a country that's under sanctions unless you get permission ahead of time to do so. And obviously they didn't get permission ahead of time to do so. With that in mind, China may have just broken the sanctions that have been put on Iran, and that would make, theoretically, China open to sanctions as well. Like the world body, the United Nations, the United States, other Western countries should be putting sanctions on China right away because they are selling. I mean, look, President Trump today, Steve Witkoff, is in Oman for the third round of peace talks or ceasefire talks with Iran about getting rid of their nuclear program. And obviously, President Trump wants those talks to succeed. Well, China sending these dangerous chemicals with pretty much only a military use into Iran right now is directly working against peace. There's no two ways about that. Now, China could gin up some plausible deniability by saying, well, that was sent by a company that did it off the books and we didn't know about it. But everybody knows that every Chinese company has to be open to spying by the PRC. And so if it could be proven that it was a PRC-linked company, or at least one that was, closely tied to the CCP, well, then you're talking about willful abrogation or willful going against the treaty that China is a signatory to help stop the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And that means that there are over 1,000 injuries, a large, and that's fertilizer, ammonium perchlorate. gallons of water would kill everything in that water. All bacteria, all seafood that was caught off the coast of. Ask if they go outside. I'm a firm believer in Occam's razor. If you're familiar with Occam's razor, that is the maxim that the simplest explanation is usually 80 tons of sodium perchlorate should not have been at the port at all. And we knew it was there. So now, since it was known to be there, now we have to go to the speculation portion of today's report. Okay, and I'm saying that right up front. Everything I say from here on out would be most likely speculation. And that's about who's responsible. Okay? Now, I'm a firm believer. I am not a conspiracy theorist. So I'm a firm believer in Occam's razor. If you're familiar with Occam's razor, that is the maxim that the simplest explanation is usually the correct explanation. And the simplest explanation for a disaster like this is that some idiot was smoking a cigarette where he shouldn't have been, and he tossed his butt in the wrong place, and something caught fire, and then that whole thing went low order, and kaboom, went up in smoke. That's the most likely explanation. So we're going to put that out right at the beginning. They just mishandled this. Arthur, you're right. They just mishandled the rocket fuel, and it blew up. Okay? But you have to agree that it is a little suspicious that this happened to blow up on the very day that the United States started the third round of negotiations with Iran. Now, that, if you were a conspiracy theorist, you could jump right to the conclusion that, it was the Mossad. No question. The Mossad knew it was there. They went in, they waited until they were just about to get to these negotiations, and then kablooey, and they sent this up in smoke to distract and cause the Iranians to be suspicious of the United States or Israel being involved in this attack. And therefore, the Iranians are going to be less likely to try to make a deal. And that makes it more likely that the United States will allow Israel to go in and once and for all destroy the nuclear capabilities of Iran. And whether or not it's the truth, I can promise you there are a lot of people in Iran tonight who are thinking real hard about that. Maybe not so sure, okay? Now, we know the Mossad has the capability to do something like this. As a matter of fact, when the explosion took place in 2020 in Beirut, that was the first thing a lot of people jumped to, was like, the Mossad just blew up all of this ammonium nitrate, which Hezbollah was saving to use in rockets against Israel. For conspiracy theories in Iran. Muslims in general have a thing for conspiracy theories. And so with that in mind, it's not unlikely that people in Iran are going to convince themselves that Israel had something to do with this. Even if they didn't, though, it certainly is in Israel's favor. It's very good for Israel what happened today in Bandar Abbas, because that is 480 tons of rocket fuel that won't be going into missiles, that won't be fired at Israel ever again. And that means that Iran now has to go looking for more sodium perchlorate in order to try to rebuild their missile stockpiles. So it's not that they don't have any left. They still have thousands of missiles left. The guess was that they had like over 3,000 missiles easily. And they've only shot maybe 500 missiles at Israel. But they don't have 3,000 missile launchers. And most of those missiles, the majority of the 3,000 missiles that they have, couldn't reach Israel. So they're more short range. And so right now, Iran desperately needs to rebuild its long-range rockets. And if they can't, that's going to put them at a distinct disadvantage in this thing. But more importantly than that, because 85% of the container traffic that goes to or comes from Iran goes through that port, shutting down that port even for a week will have a major economic impact on Iran. And without a doubt, this is going to be significant. And so we're just going to have to sit back and watch. I'm sure that more information will come out about this thing in the days and weeks to come. There will certainly be an investigation. If it's anything like the investigation in Beirut, then that investigation started in 2020 and is ongoing. It's still going on. So that means that 5 years from now, Iran's still going to be scratching its head and trying to figure out who did it. Now, one other thing I wanted to bring up. It could still have been an intentional act, even if Israel was not involved. What do I mean by that? Well, there are factions inside Iran that don't want Iran attacking Israel, that would love to see Iran's current government collapse. That being the case, those dissident groups very certainly could have had something to do with this tragedy that just happened. And so, again, we don't know. And if Iran does know, they're not going to tell anybody. They're not going to say so. So somebody was asking, how much money just went up in smoke? And so I will find out for you, how much was all that? Cost about $3,000 to $5,000 per metric ton. That's actually pretty cheap. High purity sodium perchlorate can cost up to $8,000 a metric ton. So let's use a conservative middle estimate of $6,000 a metric ton. So 480 metric tons of that stuff would only be worth about $3 million. So it's not a huge hit financially to lose all this sodium perchlorate. However, the cleanup could cost billions because, again, not all of that sodium perchlorate went up in the explosion. It did not all burn. Much of it was spread, most likely, across that whole area, a wide area of sea and land, and contaminated the whole area. So if that's the case, it could, if Iran were to do it right, it could take weeks or months or even longer to properly clean the areas of all of the fallout from this explosion. Now, Iran being Iran, there's no way they're going to close that down for weeks or months. So they might keep it closed for a couple of days and then let people back in there. And all those people will die of thyroid poisoning at some point in the future. Could be. We don't know. But the bottom line is, this is a bad day for Iran. It's a bad day for China. And it's a very good day for Israel.